Meet Nick Olivas. His innocence was taken by a perverted school teacher when he was just 14 years old, and the judicial system decided to punish him for being the victim by forcing him to pay child support for the child that came as a result of the violation he received from his adult school teacher. In the twisted labyrinth of existence, where the fickle winds of fate blow with merciless disregard, we find ourselves confronted with a tale both infuriating and perplexing. Behold the plight of Olivas, a hapless soul who, in the tumultuous epoch of his high school years, engaged in an act of carnal intimacy with a woman who was 20 years old. His insight has now been irrevocably altered, for he perceives her as a cunning predator who preyed upon a vulnerable and desolate youth, tormented by the hardships that befell his abode. Ironically, we live in a society where the actions of the teacher is frowned upon. However, in a world where we are divided into victim and victimizer, there is very little love for men who are taken advantage of by females. According to the decrees of the land, it is unequivocally stated that a child of tender age, one who has not yet seen 15 revolutions around the sun, shall never be deemed capable of consenting to the advances of an adult, irrespective of the circumstances. Thus, by the dictates of the law, Olivas stands as a victim of the abhorrent crime of rape. However, in his naivety and ignorance, he failed to recognize the gravity of the situation that entangled him in its sinister web. The trajectories of their lives diverged, as the currents of fate dictated. Olivas, now 24, living in the desert enclave of Phoenix, has gone on since being taken advantage of by the teacher to become a medical assistant, his accomplishments a testament to his perseverance. Yet, lo and behold, 2 revolutions of the celestial spheres passed, the merciless apparatus of the state descended upon him with a wrathful tempest, brandishing legal documents that bore an astonishing revelation. He had unwittingly fathered a child, a tender blossom of merely 6 years. Yes, he had no knowledge that this miscreant teacher had become pregnant when her sorry pathetic existence crossed paths with the young innocent child. We live in a world where many simp would gladly engage in coitus with her, due to their lack of options and their inability to find something meaningful. Hence, there were no excuses for her depraved action. The news struck Olivas with a cataclysmic force, shattering the fragile equilibrium of his existence. In the prime of his youth, he reveled in the pleasures of life, oblivious to the clandestine tendrils that reached out to ensnare him. To suddenly discover the existence of a progeny, a being he had not fathomed to conceive, proved an inexplicable torment that rent his soul asunder. It unleashed an overwhelming tempest of emotions, defying the boundaries of explanation and sending him spiraling into the abyss of anguish. He was a father the state was about to take advantage of and milk him for every possible dollar. Overwhelmed by this turbulence of circumstances, he succumbed to panic and willfully disregarded the legal pronouncements that beckon him to account for his paternal responsibilities. This turned out to be a mistake that he would later come to regret. Neglecting the imperative need for a paternity test, he sought refuge in ignorance, an ill-fated endeavor that would soon be shattered by the relentless pursuit of the state, as it doggedly pursued him, a predator on the scent of its quarry. How can such a cruel twist of fate befall a hapless individual, whose innocent steps in the labyrinth of life were led astray by a predatory hand? Simple, because he had a penis. The weight of his burden is staggering, for Olivas finds himself indebted to child support and medical expenses, dating back to the very birth of his child. And, as if that were not enough, the insidious specter of interest looms over him, compounding his debt by an additional 10%. The state, in its insatiable thirst for control, has resorted to seizing funds from his bank account and garnishing his wages, leaving him with a mere pittance of $380 per month. Oh, the wretched plight of Olivas is not an isolated one, but rather one among a legion of 153,000 active child support cases, as decreed by the Arizona Department of Economic Security's Division of Child Support Services. In the depths of Olivas' soul, fear has transformed into an all-consuming frustration. He yearns to be a presence in his daughter's life and is willing to assume his responsibility for future child support payments. However, he rightly contends that it is an egregious injustice for the state to burden him with fees incurred during his tender years as a child himself, or for the years of his daughter's existence that were concealed from his knowledge. Is it not a preposterous notion that a teenager should be held accountable for the actions of their youthful self? Olivas, in his anguish, finds solace in this belief. As an adult, he acknowledges the responsibility for his choices and their consequences, but to exact retribution for the actions of an inexperienced adolescent is an affront to justice itself. Advocates for the rights of fathers, though few in number, raise their voices against such injustices. They proclaim that cases like Olivas are deemed by the power that be to be a rarity, yet similar occurrences have garnered attention in several states. Despite public outcry over the perversity of charging a victim of a crime with child support, the courts have remained steadfast in their stance, affirming that the states possess the audacious right to enforce such obligations. I guess every dollar counts, but morality doesn't. The annals of history bear witness to these travesties. Recall the infamous case of a Kansas boy, a mere 13 years of age, who impregnated his 17-year-old babysitter. Under the laws of Kansas, a child under 15 is deemed legally incapable of consenting to coitus acts. Astonishingly, the Kansas Supreme Court, in 1993, declared the young boy liable for child support. Let that sink in. Okay, let's get back to the video. A parallel ruling emerged in the state of California, a few years later, concerning a 15-year-old boy who engaged in alt relations with a 34-year-old neighbor, the latter having been convicted of statutory rape. In both instances, it was the state's social services agency that relentlessly pursued the case, as the mother sought public assistance. Mel Fate, the director of the National Center for Men, aptly encapsulates the gravity of the situation, stating that the Kansas court determined that the act was irrelevant and that the child support was not owed to the sick pervert but rather to the child. Such is the twisted logic employed by those who uphold this merciless system, divorcing the crime from its repercussions and disregarding the cries for justice. This is the deplorable system that governs child support enforcement in Arizona, where the Department of Economic Security wields its iron fist. Their written policy leaves no room for exemption in cases like Olivas, unless the seeking parent has been convicted of unthinkable assault involving a minor. Attorney Janet Sell, chief counsel with the Attorney General's Office's Child and Family Protection Division, brazenly claims that such cases are rare and expresses her satisfaction in that fact. But let us dissect the twisted rationale behind this rule. DA officials argue that their intent is to ensure the welfare of the child, who had no control over the circumstances. However, if we were to reverse the roles and imagine a woman as the victim, the very notion of her having to provide financial support to her attacker would be deemed unthinkable. Mel Fate, the director of the National Center for Men, aptly denounces this double standard, declaring it as outrageously absurd. The foundational principle of justice dictates that a victim cannot be held responsible, be it in cases of rape or statutory rape where the victim's participation, regardless of its nature, cannot justify holding them accountable. In the realm of Arizona's child support policies, there is no exemption for children born to children, although the state cannot seek a court order for child support against the non-custodial parent until they reach adulthood. It matters little to the state whether the non-custodial parent was aware of the child's existence or not, as child support is treated as a separate legal matter from custody. The state further imposes its authority on parents seeking public assistance under welfare programs, obliging them to pursue child support before receiving aid. The child support payments are then utilized to reimburse the state for its assistance payments. Scott Lecken, DA Child Support Operations Administrator, callously declares that compliance with their demands is mandatory, highlighting their aim to keep parents off cash assistance and recoup some of the funds dispersed. Such coercive measures purportedly benefit everyone involved, or so they claim. The state's arsenal extends far beyond the courtroom when it comes to extracting money from parents. They can garnish wages, claiming up to 50% of disposable income. They can seize tax refunds, place liens on homes and vehicles, suspend driver's licenses, revoke passports, and plunder funds from bank accounts. Lecken proudly announces that their most significant source of income derives from income withholding orders issued to employers. Under Arizona's heartless child support formula, non-custodial parents may retain a mere $903 to cover their own living expenses, while the remaining sum becomes the basis for determining the child support payment amount. Olivas, in his valiant fight against the weight of these obligations, laments his inability to afford legal representation. Amidst this merciless battle, Olivas yearns for a chance to see his daughter. Having experienced the loss of his own mother at a tender age, he intimately understands the significance of having both parents present in a child's life. He refuses to abandon his daughter to the cold embrace of solitude, fervently declaring that she deserves the love and care of a father. In the face of this arduous struggle, we are confronted with a system that turns a blind eye to the complexities of human experiences, imposing its heartless rules and callously disregarding the cries for fairness and compassion. Let us challenge this oppressive regime and strive for a world where justice triumphs over bureaucratic tyranny.